Okay, so hello. Um, I'm Josh, and I'm going to be explaining the way I understand the TOP theories. I'm going to be posting this for the sake of posting it, but I'm doing this to kind of give me you know, helps me study. Anyway, so that's the first theory that we're going to be talking about is Gordon Allport's psychology of the individual. So if we mention Gordon Allport, this theory is the psychology of the individual, or if we talk about psychology of the individual, we talk about Gordon Allport. And so this theory basically emphasizes the uniqueness of the individual. So it's more on it's definitely more on like uniqueness rather than similarity. And this theory also argues against particularism or theories that emphasize on a single aspect of a personality. So Gordon Allport really saw the personality or the human as a whole rather than really focusing on certain aspects of personality. He didn't really like theories that would do that. So now let's define morphogenic science. So there's two kinds. There's morphogenic and then there's nomothetic. Morphogenic means individual or just one, and nomothetic means group. So when you say morphogenic science, it's the study of the individual because it's only one person when you say morphogenic. And then morphogenic methods are ways that you can gather data on a single individual. Now, nomothetic methods, or you could say nomothetic science, are the study of a group of individuals. But then, if you say nomothetic methods, it's those methods that gather data on a group of people. So, like the experiments we had in experimental psych. Now, let's talk about the eclectic approach. So, this is basically the approach that allows selection of usable elements and from different theories or approaches and combines them. So this is basically what Gordon Allport did with his theory, where he used multiple elements that he could use from different theories and concepts or approaches, and he combined them to make his own. So Allport advocated, sorry for the wrong spelling, but Allport advocated an eclectic approach to theory building. As we'll go through, you'll be able to see how like Allport really built his theory from basically everyone, right? So let's go here. So personality according to Allport. So the dynamic organization within the individual of those psychophysical systems that determine his characteristic behavior and thought. So his definition is so boring, but anyway. His definition basically suggests that humans are both product and process. We have some organized structure while possessing the ability to change. So as we can see, within the individual, the dynamic organization within the individual, which is psychophysical, that determine his characteristic behavior and thought. So it's a really boring kind of definition, but yeah, that's basically what he's saying, that it's product and process, or nature and nurture, where we are born with an organized structure, but we have the ability to change it. Now, let's talk about conscious motivation. So conscious motivation is basically being aware of what they are doing and their reasons for doing it. And Allport was more inclined to accept self-reports as at face value, but even though he didn't undermine the importance of the unconscious process. So conscious motivation basically means when you're doing an action or when you're doing anything, it's basically that you're aware that you're doing it and you know why you're doing it, rather than a baseless it's just an autonomic kind of reflex for you, or you're spacing out while you're doing it. And that's why he was more inclined when he would talk to his clients and stuff like that. He was more inclined to accept self-reports at face value. So whatever they said, instead of compared to Freud, where if you tell Freud something, Freud would be like, trying to dig deeper, you might have some past trauma or something. But Allport was more like, whatever you say it is, that's what it is. And, that's how he took it. He didn't really dig too deep. So now let's talk about what he thinks is a psychologically healthy person. So, a psychologically healthy person, or mature person, sorry, are characterized by proactive behavior. That is, they not only react to external stimuli, but are capable of consciously acting on their environment in new and innovative ways, and causing their environment to react to them. So, let's try and break this first part down. So, that what Gordon Allport is kind of explaining here is proactive behavior, and this basically means that proactive behavior basically means that they're not just waiting for stimuli to come to them and then react to it. It's more like they're also consciously changing or trying to do something in their environment that is from them good, and it could be in new and innovative ways. It's not just kanang ways that are kanang. Pause the lesson, please. Okay, where were we? So, yeah, it basically meant proactive behavior basically means that they're not just waiting for external stimuli, but in fact they're like proactively doing something to change their environment in new and innovative ways, right? When they're causing their environment to react to them rather than them always reacting to the environment. Now, mature personalities are also more likely to be motivated by conscious processes than disturbed ones. And this allows them to be more flexible and autonomous than unhealthy people who remain dominated by unconscious motives that spring from childhood experiences. What this is basically explaining is that ang conscious process, mature personalities or kanang healthier individuals, mentally mature individuals are more kanang, they're more motivated, and they do things, their actions are mostly conscious processes. So they're not really kind of floating, or they're not just spacing out. They're actually in the moment and doing what they're doing, basically. It's kind of the same. It's basically the concept of kind of conscious motivation, where was it conscious motivation? Yeah, basically the explanation of conscious motivation. So if you're a healthier person or a mentally mature person, then most of your actions would be motivated by the conscious motivation rather than kanang spacing out and just kind of floating, basically. And that's basically the characteristic. If you're just spacing out while doing things, that's basically the definition of kind of a disturbed personality, or like an immature personality, right? So let's talk about the 6 criteria for a mature personality. So we have the extension of the self here. Number 1 is extension of the sense of self. So the definition here is that everyone has self-love, but only self-extension is the earmark of maturity. Now, what does this mean? The number 1 basically means, extension of the self basically means that you understand that you are not just you, but you are a part of something bigger, whether it be a family, a community, a country, a nation, whatever it may be. You have this understanding that you have extended yourself to not only yourself but to others as well. So in a sense, you're part of something bigger. Number 2 is having a warm relating of self to others, and this means that they have a capacity to love others in an intimate and compassionate fashion. So I think from the definition itself, since the first one is more like extending yourself, being a part of others, number 2 is basically just extending your love, not just to yourself, but to others. Now, number three is emotional security or self-acceptance. So mature individuals accept themselves uh, for who they are, and they have emotional poise. So yes, they're not really insecure. They accept themselves for who they are. Yeah, emotional security and self-acceptance. That's kind of self-explanatory. Number four is realistic perception of their environment. This basically means that they're not kanang they're not delusional, or they don't live in a fantasy world. Yes. Number five is insight and humor. So they have no need to attribute their mistakes onto others, and has a non-hostile type of humor. So, these insight and humor basically just means that, they don't see flaws, or they don't use the flaws of other people as a way to kind of, make people laugh. And, their humor is not hostile. They're just, normal. Yeah. The last one is having a unifying philosophy of life. So basically having a clear view of your purpose in life. That's basically it. Those are those are his six kanang criteria for a mature personality. So let's talk about the structure of a personality now. So we have common traits, personal dispositions, and levels of personal dispositions. We'll get into that. So first, let's talk about common traits. So from the name itself, it's basically just traits that everyone has. And these are factors where people can compare different people. So an example of a common trait would be extroversion, right? An example of a common trait would be kanang extroversion, because everyone has it. It's just at different levels, but it's, everyone has that kanang trait. Another one is cleanliness. Everyone has a level of cleanliness. It's just different levels, but everyone has it. These are common traits. Personal dispositions. These are traits that are unique to the individual. So earlier we had common traits, which are common traits, and then next we have personal dispositions, which are traits that are unique to the person. Now there are levels of personal dispositions. There's cardinal, there's central, and there's secondary. So let's talk about cardinal disposition first. So the definition here is that it is eminent characteristics so outstanding that it dominates their life. Now, this is not for everyone. Not everyone has a cardinal disposition, because it would have to be something so obvious and clear that it would have to make up basically your whole personality and image. So for example, if I say the word Hitler, your first reaction is going to be, Nazi. He's the one who killed the Jews. He hates the Jews, And that basically is his cardinal disposition, because his whole personality stems around the fact that he hates the Jews. So that's an example of cardinal disposition. There's another example of a cardinal disposition. I just forgot it. But basically, yeah, let's say if you think of Joker from Batman, where he doesn't feel pain, or doesn't seem to feel pain. I don't know. I mean, I'm just yapping at this point. Anyway, that's basically what cardinal disposition is. It controls your whole life, and that's your whole image. So every time somebody thinks of you, they think of that cardinal disposition. If they think of that cardinal disposition, they think of you. That's basically what it is. Now, let's talk about central dispositions. This basically makes up five to 10 of the most outstanding characteristics which a person's life focuses. So these are these are basically like certain traits that a person has that makes them a whole. So For example, if I was to say that I was a writer, yeah, you know, uh, I'm a writer, I'm an actor, um, I'm a gamer. These are all central dispositions because it makes up a person's life. Now, uh, secondary dispositions. Now, this may vary from what I understand, but my good friend Dan told me that his definition of secondary dispositions is basically what makes up central dispositions. So, for example, the examples that I have just given you is that I'm a writer, I'm an actor, and I'm a gamer. Now, secondary dispositions are I am a fast writer, I am a bad actor, and uh, I'm a very good gamer. Those are secondary dispositions. But then again, it's a bit confusing, as said, because that's that's not really it's not really the definition. But to put it simply, so that dili na ta maglibog, we won't get confused. Cardinal dispositions basically means you see that, yeah, like you think of a person, you see that. Central dispositions is 5 to 10 of the main traits that make up who you are. Secondary dispositions are traits that are not central to personality yet, but are somewhat you know, but they occur regularly and is responsible for one specific behavior. So that's all it is. Try not to think about it too much. Next is motivational and stylistic dispositions. So this is kind of my favorite part of the kind of theory because it kind of makes sense, or it's easier to understand. So motivational dispositions basically initiates action, and stylistic dispositions guide the action. To put it simply, motivational dispositions is basically what you want to do. So in a sense, it initiates action. Ang stylistic dispositions is how you want to do it. An example of this, as I have written here. Your motivational disposition might tell you, or you as a person, just think of like as a normal person, you are hungry. Now your motivational disposition will tell you to satisfy your hunger, I want to eat food, right? That's your motivational disposition. Your stylistic disposition does not will take that information from the motivational disposition, and kanang its job is basically to figure out how you want to achieve, or how you want to pursue that goal of eating. So I want to eat this kind of food, or I don't want to eat this kind of food. So let's take me as an example. If I'm hungry, my motivation disposition will tell me to eat. Now, my stylistic disposition will tell me what to eat, because that's basically the stylistic disposition. It tells me how it wants to achieve that goal. Yeah, that's basically it. Next is proprium. Now, this is the term used by Allport to refer to those behaviors and characteristics that people regard as warm, central, and important to their life. Now, a key factor here that is not really mentioned is that proprium doesn't have to be good. It just basically means that it is a trait in which they adapt to their life in order to change. So let me just go to the Quran. Right? Yeah. No. Sorry, scratch that. But yeah, the term used by Allport to refer to those behaviors, characteristics, that people regard as warm and central and important in their life. So, any traits, any characteristics, and behaviors that you may have that you feel is important to your life and you want to that you would like to keep and maintain, these are your proprium, right? And we'll talk about that a bit more. The definition that I said earlier is later on in the lesson. So, motivation. Allport believed that it was driven by present drives rather than past events. So he saw old theories as homeostatic or reactive. So it doesn't allow space to for growth. And he believed a good theory allows for proactive behavior. So basically, si Allport, he believed that kanang motivation or our lives are driven by our current needs and current wants in life, or you could say future goals. He didn't believe that it was our past that defined what we kanang yeah what it wasn't our past that defined what we wanted or what we did. It wasn't the fuel for our behavior. And he saw old theories as homeostatic or reactive, meaning you would just stay in one place or you're just reacting to the external stimuli. And since he's a preacher of proactive behavior, he doesn't agree with this because, he thinks that you need to have space to grow. So the only way to grow is for proactive behavior, for you to actually go and do something rather than just waiting and reacting to what comes to you. So now let's talk about peripheral strivings and appropriate strivings. So peripheral motives are basically those that reduce a need, and then appropriate strivings seeks to maintain tension and disequilibrium because of the strive to change. They change the way they do things, so it causes tension and equilibrium. So let's talk about peripheral motives first. Peripheral motives is basically those that reduce a need. So any kanang want, any behavior, any motive, any kanang any need, any want, any behavior that reduces a need is a peripheral motive. Now, you might think that appropriate strivings is simple. It's just the opposite. So things that maintain tension and disequilibrium. Because peripheral motives reduce a need, so appropriate strivings may increase a need. In a sense, not really. So to explain it better, appropriate strivings is basically when you want to change, right? If there's a part of you that you would like to change that is not normal. What I mean by not normal means it's not in your usual personality. So for example, if you're a good person, or let's say you're a bad person and you're trying to change for good, so you're applying the good personality traits to your life. So that is obviously hard to maintain because you're not a naturally good person. You're a bad person. So this obviously means that it would cause tension and disequilibrium. But that's okay because you're applying it to your life to change, right? Like your purpose is for change. So that's why that's what appropriate striving says. It's just the tension and disequilibrium experienced from change. That's it. So let's talk about functional autonomy. Let's put it a bit closer there. So functional autonomy represents a theory of changing rather than unchanging motives, and is the capstone of Allport's ideas of motivation. So there's two types, preservative and appropriate. So functional autonomy is basically it talks about how, let me think, represents the theory of changing rather than unchanging. So functional autonomy is basically a concept surrounded around the idea that motivation changes, and it's not just always stuck like in one state. So there's two types. There's perseverative and there's appropriate. So what's perseverative functional autonomy? This is the tendency of an impression to leave an influence on subsequent experience. So it's somewhat like classical conditioning, where or in a sense, it's somewhat like conditioning, not really specific on either, but it's somewhat like conditioning. It's the tendency of an impression to leave an influence on subsequent experience. So when you do something and then there's something else that happens during that that influences, why you're doing it, then you know then basically you'll continue to do it, or that'll change your whole motivation. So I'll give you an example. um my teacher's example, while this may not be a good example, but it's one I like to recall to and use. Imagine a man, washing dishes, and or sorry, imagine a man living with a woman or living with his wife, and then his wife, yells at the man because he's not helping in the house. So he goes and washes the dishes. Now his motivation for washing those dishes is that he's scared because his wife yelled at him. Now, while he's doing the dishes, his wife comes up to him and gives him a kiss on the cheek. And so now his motivation has changed because we're talking about functional autonomy, right? So now the motivation has changed. Now it's this idea, or now his motivation changed to this idea, if he washes dishes, he will get a kiss. So it's a tendency of an impression, and the impression is basically the kiss, to leave an influence. It changed the subsequent it changed the motivation on a subsequent experience. So that's kind of the easiest way I can explain to someone who's, yeah. Next is appropriate functional autonomy. So, appropriate functional autonomy is the self-sustaining motives that are related to the proprium. So, this is basically the master system of motivation that confers unity on personality. So these are basically, as we have mentioned earlier, proprium is katong, the characteristics, traits, and behaviors that you feel is important to you, right? So you keep them. So if you are doing something, or let's say, for example, actually, I don't understand this too well. Or I must have it, I just forgot. I think what I understand from it is that okay, I remember now. So an example of this is, let's say a person is, poor when they grow up, and so they have developed this habit where they're very kuripot with their money. They're misers, they're hoarders. They don't really let go of things, because when they were poor, or when the person was poor, they didn't have much. So they would hold on to a lot of things, right? Now in the future, he becomes wealthy, not wealthy enough to be financially stable. He doesn't really have to worry about money, but he is still a miser. He is still a kind of hoarder. He still doesn't let go of things. And that's basically what appropriate functional autonomy is, because the behavior didn't change, yet the circumstances did. So before, the motivation was, I'm poor, so that's why I'm doing this. But now that kind of motivation has been fulfilled, he's not poor anymore. He's gone past that. Now his motivation to do what he's doing, so basically saving money and hoarding, his motivation to do that is just because I feel the need to do it now, because I've done it for so long. That's what appropriate functional autonomy is. So in a sense, it's like appropriate, since it's part of his personality that he deems or that the person deems important to them. The motivation behind the action can change regardless, but the behavior stays the same. And we can see that in the next line, where the criterion for functional autonomy is that the behavior continues even when the motivation changes. So functional autonomy does not explain everything. So some examples are biological drives. So eating, breathing, sleeping, like it's not really under functional autonomy. Motives that are directly linked to the reduction of basic drives. I'm not exactly sure. I forgot what that means. Reflexes like eye blink. So, those are not really, those cannot be considered behaviors that have different motivations. Constitutional equipment. So, things like physique, intelligence, temperament, those are not like, they cannot be under Gordon Allport didn't see them as one. Habits in the process of being formed. So in the process of being formed, not it hasn't formed yet. So functional autonomy, as we mentioned earlier, katong example sa the example with the money person, that became a habit, right? To save money. Now like even though he's rich, he can still save money. He still wants to save money. Now that is a appropriate functional autonomy, but if it was still in the process of being made, then it's not yet. So it's basically it. Then the patterns of behavior that require primary reinforcement. So yeah, sublimations that can be tied to childhood sexual desires, and some neurotic or pathological symptoms. So disabilities. No. Okay, so study of the individual, which is basically the theory, right? So Allport repeatedly advocated the development and use of research methods that study the individual. So, morphogenic, diba? So, ang nomothetic, we can see here, it seeks general laws, and idiographic refers to that which is peculiar to a single case. So, ang kanang idiographic no kay kuan kanang basically outliers, things that are not usual or normal. And nomothetic seeks general laws, or basically a group. And yeah, study of the individual advocated and the development and use of methods that study the individual, so morphogenic, And then the critique of Allport. So let's talk about how he was critiqued. He based his theory of personality more on philosophical speculation and common sense rather than actual scientific investigation. So yeah, he had a philosophical background, if I'm not mistaken. So he was more on philosophical aspects and common sense and like just general thinking rather than actual scientific methods and investigation. So yeah, that's basically Gordon Allport. So yeah, I don't really know how to end this. Next, I'll be talking about the 16 personality theory by Raymond Cattell. Anyway, goodbye.